There's all these rumors that you would hear about what a hospital gets paid per COVID death.
Ivermectin alone, if properly utilized, is capable of driving this pathogen to extinction.
This is really gene therapy. It's a different thing.
Everything you just heard is false. It's a mini slice of the so-called creator's expression that's on episodes of Joe Rogan, who's Spotify's $100 million man. By now, you also heard that he has the platform's most popular podcast, and he got the guy who made Heart of Gold mad because of his COVID fiction. But another reason this is all a big deal is because it's finally moved podcast misinformation to the front of our minds. We tend to talk about online misinformation on Twitter or Facebook like it's this contagious disease that manifests in real life, like an insurrection. Podcasts should be treated just like another mutation. Look at Steve Bannon. He's banned from Twitter, Spotify, and YouTube after he said he wanted to behead Anthony Fauci. But his podcast, which appears to live in an alternate reality, is still on Apple's top 100. There's also that infectious algorithm. Love that Bannon bit where he's still calling President Biden illegitimate in 2022? You might also like this hit from Dan Bongino.
The left does not care that masks have been ineffective in stopping the pandemic. They don't.
Don't get me wrong. The fact that some tech giants are flagging and deleting false info means we've made some progress. But when it comes to tracing misinformation on podcasts, we're only a few steps from the starting line. Brookings Institution's Valerie Wirtschafter put out a study on election fraud claims on podcasts, and she found two things. Hosts made more of them after the election, even after it became clear that they were bogus, and there weren't many studies like hers out there.
There were some articles out there. Some people had sort of looked anecdotally at some series, but nothing really attempting to explore this space more broadly. Twitter is a bit more straightforward because, there's only a certain number of characters you can put in a tweet. In a podcast, even if you transcribe it, you're dealing maybe with 3-4 hours sometimes of text. Think about it as like searching for that needle in a haystack. I think it's really important to be able to systematically quantify it, to be able to understand where these things are happening, how big of a problem it is that we're dealing with. That will be really valuable in terms of thinking about sort of what kinds of responses need to be taken.
A survey showed audio's the way 60% of listeners under 40 get their news. And podcasts grab a lot of those ears because they connect listeners and hosts without the time and content restrictions of radio. Plus, the quickest way to share information is the human voice. But that convenience showed it could be a wild danger back when radio was still figuring itself out. In 1920s Kansas, there was another guy playing doctor without a real degree, John R. Brinkley. What he lacked in education, he made up for in having his own radio station. And he used it to promote $1 million business, goat testicles. He'd implant them on actual men as a way to help the, quote, sexually weak. The feds got around to shutting him down, but not before dozens died after his procedures. Attaching goat testicles to people is, to our knowledge, a thing of the past. But what we haven't left behind is letting folks with a mic and a following go wild, while the orgs with the power to intervene play catch up. After the Rogan COVID kerfuffle, before the other one with the racial slur, Spotify announced it was adding content advisories to any podcast episode discussing COVID, and that it already removed 20,000 episodes related to the virus. We also asked other platforms about their policies on misinformation. The ones who got back to us answered with different rules. And frankly, it's hard to figure out how a popular podcast can break all of them. That means plenty of open lines for podcasters bonding with listeners over more lies. It leaves a space where social responsibility doesn't get in the way of being able to say what you want. But that's why podcasts are popular in the first place, right?
I'm gonna get arrested for saying this.
You can say whatever you want.
Oh,
We're
thank
on
you.
Spotify.
I think 2004, 2005, when the medium was a little bit taking off, people said it was a dying medium, that it didn't have a business model, that it would never make it. Then in the early 2010s, we get shows like Serial, which are these kind of, really dramatic storytelling. Funny enough, in 2017 or 2016, around the election of Donald Trump, we started to see this real shift into the podcasting space of more progressive political commentators. So people were talking about this medium as the liberal antidote to conservative talk radio. Right now, while there are sort of more liberal podcasters, certainly, there are also tons of more conservative-leaning podcasters that have very popular shows. And the way that I sort of think about distinguishing podcasting and radio is that for a podcast, radio seems to be a bit more of a passive act, whereas podcasting has a bit more of an intentionality to it, in the sense that I decide this is the moment I'm going to turn my podcast on. Whereas, if you're in the car, you turn on the radio, you just want background noise. This sort of connection is very unique. And I think it's a very common thing that happens when people listen to podcasts, is these relationships get built. It's definitely has the potential to be a more powerful medium. And the fact that really anyone can be a podcaster makes it important to understand it in terms of the type of information that is getting spread, because it could potentially be more impactful given this intimate relationship.